speakers. So McGraw-Hill welcomes all of you and Professor Azhar Kazmi and Dr. Adela Kazmi for joining us today for the webinar on strategic management, managing your organization the right way. A small intro to the speakers. Our speakers, Professor Azhar Kazmi is a visiting professor at King Fahd University of Petroleum and Minerals at Tehran, Saudi Arabia. He has been teaching MBA students for more than 40 years and has authored several research papers and articles in Indian and international publications. Dr. Adela Kazmi is PhD in Management Studies from Banasthali University, Jaipur, India, and MBA in General Management from International Islamic University, Malaysia, Kuala Lumpur. Dr. Adela Kazmi is lecturer in management at Sophia Girls College at Ajmer, India, and is presently an independent author and adjunct professor. They have recently revised and authored the fifth edition of McGraw-Hill's book, Strategic Management. Today, they are both here to share with us their views and insights on the application of strategic management along with strategy formulation, implementation, and evaluation. Let's hear more from our speakers. Stay tuned to enjoy the session. Over to you, sir.
Okay. Thank you, Prakriti, for introducing me to the audience, 100 plus audience. And a very good afternoon to all of you there in India and maybe somewhere else too in this globalized world online webinars. Well, to tell you my coordinates, I am in Saudi Arabia right now. I am talking to you from my home, and this is a place called Dahran. It's very pleasant outside. It's about 22 degrees. And contrary to what many of you might think, that Saudi Arabia is a desert and it's always hot. Yes, it is hot most of the year, but this time it's quite pleasant. And it's in India it's 4 p.m. Here it's 1:30 p.m. Today, Adila, my co-author, and I would like to share some thoughts on strategic management, a subject that I have been living with for most of my professional career, and Adila also has taken up this area as an area of her interest. What we plan to do in the next about an hour is that first I will be sharing my thoughts to you, and what I want to do is to present to you first some developments that have been taking place. Now, popular press calls it trends or mega trends. So I'll be talking to you in the beginning about these mega trends and then take you to the position where organizations have to respond to these developments in the environment, and then what can be done. So, and then I'll hand it over to Adila to take you through the process of strategic management and also the model that we have adopted in our textbook since many years. But before I begin, let me give you a short uh, a personal sort of introduction to the book. Many of you might have seen the book in its previous edition or in its latest fifth edition. This is the fifth edition that came out last October. Now, this book has been serving the Indian markets in 1992, and many people ask me why did I write this book. Well, at that time I was a young assistant professor, and when I was given this course to teach, we had an American textbook on that was called Business Policy, and it didn't have anything except the American uh, perspectives, American examples, American companies. And at that point, I had to bring in examples and experiences from outside the book into my classrooms, and I realized that my other fraternal colleagues across the Indian business schools would be facing the same uh, challenge. So I thought, why not I put these examples and take the help of the theory which is there and try to coalesce them into a text that would be relevant to the Indian context. So that was the idea, and that idea, the book has grown on that idea basically. So over the years, we have taken up one issue after the other, and it has undergone four revisions since the first edition was brought out in 1992. And in every edition, practically for us, it's a new book, because we rewrite it in a way, and we try to bring in the latest theories and developments and examples and new companies that have entered the corporate space and so on. So that has been our effort. And let me tell you that the journey has been not only exciting, but it's also been quite challenging to keep up with the developments and to bring the developments into the between the covers of the book. Now, let me start with the mega trends that we would not like to talk about. Uh, Here is the next slide, and you will see that the title of the slide we have used is the macro environment changes taking place. So you could see only three, but there are many macro environment changes that are taking place. But these three are the mega trends that have been going on since many years. I would say many decades now. Like take the case of globalization. And we take globalization in the context of globalization of production and marketing. So globalization has been taking place since many years now, and the world economies and the national economies both have been opening up to more global trade as well as global production and marketing. Of course, global trade got fillip with many other developments that took place, like the ease of transportation, the growing sophistication in terms of logistics, and so on. So these developments they supported the globalization of world trade. What facilitated the production and marketing were also, in addition to these, were also the uh, enabling legal frameworks that came up in several countries, and then the attitudinal changes that took place. I think all of us have studied basic economics, and you must have come across the term protectionism. So at one time, 1940s and 50s, particularly after the Second World War, of course, the war boosted the economies, but ironically, one would say, but still the many economies were inward looking, including our own. After independence in 1947, we laid much stress on indigenization and developing our own resources and developing the public sector. Rightly so in the context of those times. So this inward-looking attitude of economies and the policymakers they led to protectionism. That means country after country trying to protect its uh, in many cases, in the case of developing economies, many of the industries were nascent industries, they were not developed. And in many of these cases, it seemed imprudent to just open up the economy and let these nascent industries and the fledgling companies in those nascent industries to face the strong winds of global competition, because many of the developed economies, they were already ahead on the trajectory of growth, and therefore it seemed not just imprudent but also unwise and unfair to do that. So maybe there was some justification. So as we went along, we saw that globalization phenomenon had increased, particularly after the 1980s, and we have had and coming up with the World Trade Organization and many other legal frameworks, both internationally and nationally, we find that globalization really took place. Now, in recent years, we have had a backlash of sort to globalization, particularly with Trump taking over in the US, uh, and Trump's policies of bringing back the American industry to America, and his emphasis on uh, uh, creating employment for the Americans by the American companies and not going abroad and creating employment for others. So those policies, they did create a backlash against globalization, and we have a phenomenon today which works in tandem with the mega trend of globalization. So the mega trend of globalization of production and marketing still goes on, yet there seems to be some little, say, reversal of deglobalization, in some cases. Now, the other mega trend is that of the liberalization of economies. Now, this has also been there on the world scene since many decades. And we note liberalization or market reforms, or in so many different ways that it is referred to. We see it happening uh, from the mid 70s, maybe particularly after the oil crisis of 1973. And we also see that this liberalization of economies is also in association with the uh, mega trend of globalization. So liberalization of economy, it meant the opening up of the economy to competition, and where the economy was dominated by public sector. In many developing economies, it was dominated by public sector by design, not and deliberately. So that was sought to be open to private investment and private efforts, and that's how liberalization of economy took place in many different ways. Company countries after countries, they started the liberalization process in different ways, in their own ways. We were a bit late. We started in a small way in 1984, and then in a big way in 1991, and then later we have been through several steps in liberalization, and governments after government, irrespective of the politics and also ideologies, the economic ideology has more or less remained the same all through the Congress and the BJP governments during the past, say, about 40 years. The present government also continues with the liberalization process. Like we have seen efforts at liberalization of labor reforms in recent times. So the liberalization of economy we have seen in many areas, including the fiscal areas, monetary areas, industrial liberalization, and so on. And all these have created certain pressures that I'll be just now referring to in my next slide. The third is the inevitable megatrend of internationalization of corporations. Never in human history we have had such rapid growth of the internationalization of corporations. Of course, multinational corporations have been there since about 200 years. But uh, the the intensity of internationalization was never so high as it has been in recent times. So we have seen country after country coming up with more and more of their companies as a result of globalization and liberalization becoming internationalized, or globalized. Naturally, when companies they take steps to globalize their production and marketing, it would lead to internationalization. So, in many countries, the like many European countries, they had a long experience and deep experience of internationalization of corporations. And many of their companies, like Unilever, for example, have been international corporations or what we call multinational corporations since more than 100 years. And so is the case with many American corporations that have been operating around the world uh, for more than 100 years. And they are familiar companies with very familiar brand names which operate all around the world, whether it be food processing or ready-made food, processed food, or fast foods, or in the areas of information technology or computers and so on. So we have these corporations making a name for themselves in terms of the internationalization. Now, as I told you, these three are the mega trends, but there are several trends, and some of these trends, in fact, come up, and sometimes they do fade in intensity. Like currently, we are facing a sort of pandemic in the form of the incidence of COVID-19. This is also a trend, not a mega trend, but a trend in the sense that this is going to affect the general direction. Of course, these megatrends will continue, and they have continued throughout, and they're likely to continue in the future too. But these developments, like coming up of a pandemic or sometimes some other thing, like the financial crisis of 2008 and so on. So these developments also tend to impact and alter the overall direction and the course of events that take place globally and nationally. So, of course, we can go on and on talking about these because this is such an interesting area talking about mega trends. So, let's now move to the point where we can now discuss about the uh, changes within the organizations. Now, naturally, when organizations, irrespective of whether they are domestic or multinational companies, or not even commercial organizations, but all types of organizations, they feel the impact of these megatrends and these developments in the environment. And I believe most of the audience would be either students or faculty in business and management. And therefore, we have studied in many courses about the business environment and the impact of business environment on organizations. So these megatrends in the environment, they have an impact in within the organizations, and they create pressures within the organizations. Like one pressure that organizations feel is that of competitiveness. That company after company and industry after industry, they feel the heat of competition. They feel the intensity of competition going up in their industry. And there are so many industries around. You just look around and find that there. Of course, I could give you several examples, but one example should be enough in the context of India. You take automobile or telecommunications. These two industries at one time were not at all competitive, and they were dominated by two or three oligopolistic type of companies, and these companies shared the market between themselves. And of course, they couldn't satisfy the demand until the markets opened up. Because of liberalization, the markets opened up and the industry was thrown to competition, both from foreign companies as well as emerging Indian companies. And today we have a situation where the automobile industry in India has so many companies operating in the market. So internally, the companies face the pressures of competitiveness, and they try to respond in many ways, And here we also must think of those companies which were formerly in the government sector or were in the public sector. Now these companies also face the heat of competition. Then we have the pressures of customer demands. Because of competition, the margin of maneuver for the for the customers, it goes up. In the sense that, like in a monopolistic or an oligopolistic market, the companies rule the roost. So they dictate what products will be offered and what features will be offered, at what prices will they be offered, and so on. And poor customers, they have to just take what comes. So so in an uncompetitive market, customers really do not have a choice. But when competition uh, offers customers wider and better choices, the customers also start demanding. And from customers, they become demanding customers. Now, these demanding customers, they demand of companies, and the companies feel the pressure of customer demands. And the companies also start responding in several ways to the customers. Like, say, for example, companies might come up with more communication and better communication or richer communication with the customers. Earlier, if they didn't bother about what customers said about their companies or their products, now the companies bother a lot about what the customers say and what the customers feel. In fact, the companies want to go into the market and find out what the customers are saying about their products and their and the company itself, and the brand names. And that's the reason why we have this emphasis on customer relationship management and analysis of big data that comes from the markets. So the companies, they try to uh, respond to the pressures of customer demand. And associated with that is the pressures of quality management. Naturally, competitiveness, or rather competition or intensity of competition in the market exerts pressures on the company to deal with their prices, for example, or with quality, because these are the two major aspects, major criteria for for competing. So quality management becomes an area of big challenge for the companies because much of the competition, especially in differentiated markets, it is based on quality. Good quality fetches more customers, and every company knows that. And therefore, internally, the companies respond by having better quality management systems and so on. And that's the reason why there came a phase in the 1980s where there was much talk about quality management, and the world tried to learn from countries that were doing well on quality, especially Japan. So the Japanese experience of quality. In fact, Japan came up in a big way because of its emphasis on quality. Then we have this very challenging area of human resource management and human resources development. Now, naturally, when there is competition, customers are demanding, quality has to be improved. The people within the organizations, they also have to be not just better educated, but also better trained and better experienced, and also have to have certain attitudinal changes, especially in terms of how they look to the markets and how they respond to the markets. In general, I will put it like that people within the companies, over the years, they have learned how to have a better market orientation. That means a better sense of what the market is, a better sense of what the customer is and what the customer desires and wants. In the earlier situations, when the companies didn't bother about the markets nor the customers, and they could afford to do so, but now they can't afford to do so. They also have to have people within who would be able to uh, respond to these pressures and also respond to the customers in the industry and markets outside. And therefore, essentially, the human resources within the companies today, I would say, like when I joined the company after my engineering, that company was operating in a very stable environment, in a very sort of comfortable environment, where there wasn't much complexity outside, or wasn't much turbulence outside, and so on. And therefore, things were more or less stable within the company too. So the positions, the designation, the reporting relationships, and all the various aspects of the organizational configurations, they were more or less stable over the years. But today's organizations are melting pots, inside, and because they have to deal with all these changes within the organization that I am talking about. So what we see is that in the previous slide, we talked about the pressures outside or the challenges outside, and these challenges uh, impacting the organizations within. So the next thing that we need to look at is that all these changes lead to the need for a way of managing, and that's why the title of today's webinar is how to manage the organization the right way. So strategic management offers a way to manage the organizations, to face competitive pressures, and to emphasize that organizations need long term strategies to deal with the competition outside. And they need to increasingly rely on planning, and planning in the particularly in the form of strategic planning. Now, many people have the notion that if the environment outside is so unstable, what would be the rationale for having a plan? That plan would become redundant in no time. That's true. But in fact, the very fact that there is a lot of turbulence outside, we do need a plan, because that plan becomes our mast, to which we hold on uh, in the time of high and low tides. And therefore, this strategic management concept is built around that idea of giving to the organizations a framework on the basis of which they could manage the total organization. It's not just the boardroom that we talk about in strategic management. We talk about the organization as a whole, and strategic management offers a way. Now, strategic management is also a product of the times, as I have been talking about. So when we look at it historically, well, uh, at the time there was more emphasis on like plain and simple budgeting. So if you had an annual budget, maybe you could do planning through the budget. So that seemed to be enough in a context where the environment wasn't as challenging and demanding as it is today. And therefore, the history of planning also shows that over a period of time, planning has evolved in response to the environmental developments. So we have had simple budgeting as a tool for planning, or later we had say functional planning. So we could have like a manpower plan, or things like a procurement plan, and so on, and have these several plans, and then later came the idea, why not merge these plans into a grand plan for the whole organization? And at that time, we had this concept of corporate plan. And corporate plan gradually evolved into a strategic plan, and that's what we are talking about. So by the 1970s, we had this idea of strategic planning coming in a big way. Of course, it got a boost with many developments, including, I think, the and it came from unexpected quarters. Like many of the ideas in for strategic planning came from the war efforts during the Second World War. And then they came from management of space programs, or sometimes they came from management of public finances. So from these many and varied sources, scholars over a period of time have pulled the ideas and then tried to coalesce them into an intelligible structure and model. So this model that we have is a product of many brilliant minds over a period of time. And what we have done simply is to borrow those ideas and take it in the form of a model that Adila would soon be telling you about. So that model of strategic management is what becomes the basis for strategic management within organizations. And it offers a systematic framework of telling the organization's planners where to start, what to do, and what to do next. And therefore, this model, which is essentially very logical and in fact a very simple model. It's nothing uh, very complex. So it's quite a simple model if you look at it, but as you delve deeper into the model, you see the complexities coming up gradually. So the beauty with this model is that in a simple form it gives us a very clear idea and so on. And let me tell you, over my long experience of many of the students in the audience, like some of the students who come back to me after a few years of working in the companies, they tell me, sir, one thing that we benefited was the model that we got in the course that you taught us. I asked them, how did you benefit from that, my boy? Tell me that. And my boy would tell me that, sir, what we find is that when we can, in fact, this model seems to be applicable in many contexts. And we can simply take the ideas from these models and apply to the situation that we are facing and dealing with. And we do get answers. So this model does provide answers. And as I was telling you, these models become even more relevant and more important and significant at times when we face crisis. Like in the face of the present crisis that the world is facing, COVID-19, we have had so many upsets. Plans have been upset, and organizations, they have had to slow down, or the demand has gone down, movement of people has stopped, and certain industries are devastated. Like tourism sector, including all the industries associated with the tourism sector, it's devastated. Airlines industries, hotels, and tourism agencies, and so on. So this sector is devastated, and it will take a long time for the sector to recover. Well, it is at these times that these sector, the industry, and the companies within the industries, they have a need for strategic management. So what I would request now to Adela is to take us through the model of strategic management, and before that, if she could give a definition that we have used, and also have a classic definition so that we see what changes we try to bring about, and then Adela could take us to the thing about the importance of strategic management. Maybe I would button after she has finished and make one or two more points. So over to Adila now. Thank you.
Good evening, one and all. So we have been talking about strategic management for some time now, and I will take you. You have been to the practical part, and now I will take you to the theory part of what the book says. So here is the old definition and the new definition, and very clearly you would be able to mark the differences between the older concept, the old school, and the new one that we have adopted for our book. So Mr. Chandra said in 1962, this was the 62 we are talking about, the determination of the basic long-term goals and objectives of an enterprise and the adoption of courses of action and the allocation of resources necessary. So basically, strategy is your plan, your action, your policies, your rules, and how you are associating your resources with it, and then you are defining your organization structure. So the importance of strategy was so much that your organization structure would be based on the kind of strategy that you would have. um, Modernization came, technology came, and then changes did came in the way things were working. So the new definition that we have evolved is it's a dynamic process. Dynamics means it's constantly evolving. We adapt to the needs of the markets, the business environment needs that we have been talking for so long now. And it's a continually evolving, iterative, not at all rigid process, step by step, which is adapted according to the needs of the particular organization. Which also involves formulation, implementation, evaluation, and control of strategies. So here you would have the strategic intent for the organization, and then few strategies would be devised at the higher in the higher hierarchy, lower hierarchy of the organization, and then the implementation part of putting them into the action phase, which is called, and the evaluation and control. Of course, the last process remains to be the important one. And in practice, actually, they are not stages; they would better be called phases instead of stages or steps. So here is the process of strategic management. Uh, the which you can call the gist of the book, on which all the preceding 13 chapters have been formulated. So the first part is establishing of the strategic intent. Here you talk about the vision, the mission, the business model, the corporate objectives that the organization sets. The Yeah. And then the second part, formulation of strategies. Here, the environmental appraisal, the organizational appraisal, corporate level strategies, international strategies, business level strategies, the strategic analysis of the company would be done. The company would make a strategic choice here, and then the strategic plan would come. This is the detailing part of the strategy. And then the implementation part, the doing part for the organizations. How do they activate their strategies, the structure, the system, the processes, people, the behavioral implementation, the attitudes people need to adopt, the attitudinal change they need to adopt, the function implementation, different departments, how they would be individual departments, for example, the production department, the marketing department would be adopting them, and then putting these strategies into action. And the last part, the strategic evaluation, a constant monitoring of the strategies that have happened, the strategic control, when, where, and how much required, and then reformulating the strategies if required, if need be. I think quite a few of them have been covered in the slide for in the pressing issues, the significance of strategic management in today's time, because as has been spoken about by my father, the companies today, of course, they need to take care of the governmental actions, the business environment they are into, the legal complexities of the societies they are into, but most of their actions would be derived from the competitive actions, the competition, and this is a live example of an international word that we are into, technology, how it has got into our lives. So that becomes a driving force, which makes strategic management, strategy formulation more important, even more important. The long-term strategies for survival, growth, and profitability in a competitive market. Companies also look for long-term things instead of short-term. And then they need to respond to the pressures from the global competition. They need to internationalize and so on. I think the need to internationalize is on one of the objectives of all the companies that start to operate in a particular market. And then the last point, very important: ethics, business ethics, environmental protection, corporate governance, and sustainability. They are assuming greater importance. They become part of the syllabus. Books are being written on it. We have co-authored a book. How they have been adapted in the syllabus, in the working of organizations, in the way people have started working, in the way people are formulating their strategies and devising their objectives, keeping in mind these issues. Thus, stressing the importance of strategic management even more. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I think that was a very, very delightful session. Thank you to you as well, sir. We have a few very good questions from our attendees here. So I would like to open it to you both, and as you would want to answer. So the first one is from Aravindanet. They ask, in this competitive and dynamic market, we need a strategy for sure. How does a company make sure it is the right strategy?
Okay, so how does one make sure that it's the right strategy? Well, that's $1 million or $1 billion question. Uh, of course, we do have ways and means to evaluate the strategy before it's implemented. In fact, we have a very famous framework given by Rumelt, and it was given, I think, in the 70s, where, and we do talk about that framework in the book, where the Rumelt has talked about putting the formulated strategy to for test. So, for example, he says that we should put the formulated strategy to the test of whether it's internally congruent. I'm just giving an example. So, the better the internal congruence would be. What does it mean by internal congruence? Well, this is an old idea where you have several plans, like say for example, functional plans are there. So what he's saying is whether the marketing plans they mesh properly with the production plan, for example. So if this congruence is there, the level of congruence is there, then internally the strategy is okay. So, and in this way, there are a series of checklists that you need to check out about the formulated strategy. So that is the point where we can test before we implement the strategy. And your question is very right in the sense that once an organization would commit a lot of resources to implementing a particular strategy, well, they do need to be sure about whether the strategy has a chance to work, and therefore one needs to test the strategy before it could be implemented. Yet, there is no guarantee that any strategy would be successful, much less it will be 100% successful, because nobody can guarantee. The only thing that strategic management can assure you is that with strategic planning, you have a better chance of dealing with the future. Just a better chance, not the best chance to. Because even with the best plans, sometimes the best plans could fail. Like companies which were not ready for an epidemic to happen like this, Well, they did fail, and particularly many of the small companies or small industries, as we call in India, they have simply disappeared, and hundreds and thousands of small companies around the world, they have fallen prey to this COVID pandemic and its effects, and therefore, and big organizations have been able to cushion the impact, in many different ways, So that shows that, and even medium sized organizations who have had planning, so on, they have a better capability to to face the impact of any crisis that happens in the environment. So your question is very right. So we do have means to evaluate the strategy before it's implemented. Of course, in the framework, when we talk about strategy evaluation, that's evaluation as the implementation is going on. So, okay, next question, Prakriti.
Sure, sir. This is from Nikhil Priya. They ask, do you think corporates frame strategies keeping in mind the mission statement?
Yeah, I think Adila can answer that. Adila, would you like to take it up?
Can you come again, Ms. Prakriti?
Sure, ma'am. So the question is, do you think corporates frame strategies keeping in mind mission statements?
Corporate corporates frame oh, okay. Do you think corporates frame strategies keeping
Yeah, they formulate strategies, keeping in mind the
yeah,
mission
they
statement.
formulate strategies keeping in mind the mission statement. Uh, I am sure the corporates do have in mind their mission statement when they are formulating their strategies. Plus, they would also be thinking about ways to put into action their mission statements. For example, if somebody has a mission statement which says that we would also be taking care of the environment, then if there is a company into plastic manufacturing, they would definitely take the mission statement into account and keep that into the implementation part. If you want to add something.
Yeah, of course. In fact, the strategies flow from the mission statement. Ideally, they should. Practically, you might think that they don't, but ideally, they should flow from the mission statements. In fact, the purpose of mission statement is to guide strategy formulation. And therefore, and the very that a plastic manufacturer would have to, in fact, keep in mind the environmental impact of their operations, on the impact on the environment, and therefore their strategies would have to be consistent with their mission statement, because they have to, if they commit to protecting the environment as one of their objectives, then naturally the strategies would have to be what we now call green strategies. So green strategies, in fact, come out of the concern of the organizations for the physical environment. So very much, and ideally they should. In fact, they facilitate, and if the organizations they keep in mind their mission statement and formulate their strategies, they are likely to do better. In fact,
Okay, sir. So we have one from Sanjeev Chaudhary, and the question is that most of the views maybe are permanent to the red ocean strategy, but may not be very relevant to blue ocean strategy or for startups. What are your comments on that?
yeah, startups and these they do offer a special case. Red ocean, blue ocean idea has been there for some time now. Let me give you a brief idea to those of you who might be not be familiar with these terms. Red ocean characterizes a highly competitive industry. While blue oceans characterize those industries where the competition is lesser, or at least within an industry, that part of the industry where the competition is not as intense, and therefore the blue ocean protagonists, they advise to the companies to move to those areas where there is lesser competition, or ideally there is no competition. There is no competition. And of course, personally, I don't subscribe much to this idea of red blue oceans, because it doesn't seem to me very practical. But anyway, if it can guide strategy formulation, well, it can be used to that extent, because it's already there in strategic management frameworks, even before this idea was talked about. We do have niche strategies. The idea of niche strategies has always been there, especially in the area of marketing. Niche marketing has always been there, that marketers look for uh, some gaps in the market where the demand is unfulfilled, and they try to fulfill the demand in those gaps, so that they have a ready market there and less competition, or even no competition. Now, the case of startups, well, startups have a very challenging uh, task before them, and because startups first have to look for survival. That's and that's the reason why many of the entrepreneurs, and they, in the initial years at least, they are obsessed with, and they need to be obsessed with survival, because only when they are able to survive the initial years, because every business, if it is able to survive 3 4 5 years, then only it can grow further. So startups have a special challenge that way. In fact, strategic management could help the startups lessen the pain of entrepreneurship, lessen the challenge, the intensity of the challenges that they face, because many of these startups are by by technical people, and they do not have much idea about management or strategic management, so if they have a good idea about strategic management, and right in the beginning, if they are able to formulate a good mission statement, and are able to develop clear ideas about their strategies and the plans, then it would facilitate them a lot, because many of the startups start up in a very haphazard manner, and then they just struggle for survival and so on and so forth. Of course, some of them do survive, but if you analyze them, my hunch is, I do not have any research support for that. My hunch is that many of these startups survive just because they happen to be in blue oceans, So they didn't survive because of their own capacity to survive, but they survived because the environment didn't pose many challenges to them. And many of the good people, good entrepreneurs, they didn't survive because the environment was very harsh to them and very tough for them. And therefore, what we feel in strategic management is that the application of strategic management right from the beginning to a startup would, in fact, help them a lot, and they should definitely, in fact, every business plan uh, for a startup should have a component of devising a mission statement and a strategy statement. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. We have one more question from Mr. Deepak Jain. His question is how to manage global investment under current stage where power countries are trying to create business and monopoly strategic alliances to sustain.
I don't know what Deepak has in mind, but I think global investments, well, if you take investments, traditionally we take the investments in two ways, like industrial investments and investments on the stock markets, what we call the foreign direct investments and foreign institutional investments, Let's take them one by one. Foreign institutional investments do flow to the stock markets in developing countries, like it's happening in India. Now our stock market is shooting up not because there is something good happening inside the country. It's shooting up just because the money doesn't know where to go. And all the dollars that Trump printed, the trillions of dollars that were printed, now they are trying to find some avenues around the world, and our stock market offers them good options, and therefore we have many of the foreign institutional investors, pension funds, and so on, investing a lot into Indian share market, and that's the reason why the share market is booming. So that's one way it's happening. Uh, Another way, and that's a more serious way of, and a more stable and a permanent way of investment, and that's foreign direct investments. Well, India hasn't benefited much from the diversion of the investment that has taken place from China in recent years. So what we find is, I think a recent study was saying that out of 1,000 uh, uh, changes in the investment, I mean the changes that took place away from China, a majority of them went to South Asian countries like Vietnam and Cambodia and Philippines and so on. Very few, in fact, we could count them on fingers that have come to India. So India has not been able to attract foreign direct investment as a result of the uh, disengagement with China. Otherwise, long-term for foreign direct investment has been going on in India because Indian markets are an attractive market and have been attractive markets in the long run, and as an outcome of globalization and internationalization, and that we talked about in the beginning of our presentation, India has been a beneficiary from many years. So we have had, as soon as we opened up, in fact, in 1991. Uh, uh, Many of the foreign companies started investing, and that's why we have a lot of global investment flowing into India, both in foreign direct investment and in the foreign institutional investment. I think I have answered Deepak's question. If anything remains, I think he can put it again, because I didn't get the last part of what he was asking you. Yeah.
That's okay, sir. If I'll try and share the question to you on email, if required, maybe we can take it up there. So we are
Sure, sure.
about at the end of the session, sir. But before we leave, there are two questions actually that I think would be very pertinent here. One is from Mr. Stanley Das. They ask, should corporate governance norms be a part of strategic management framework by executive, or should it be in the domain of
Yeah.
board? And one more question, sir, is can you refer to a very recent case study that might be helpful for people who are attending to court, in especially in the pandemic times, something that has worked.
Yeah. To the first question about corporate governance, I think, in fact, we have already, in strategic management, we have already included the in corporate governance and the framework. Earlier, in the previous editions, we included corporate governance as a part of implementation, but gradually we came to realize that corporate governance, along with some other issues that Adila did refer to, we have brought them to the fore, where we have brought them to chapter 2. Earlier, they were in chapter 11 or 12. So we have brought them to chapter 2 to highlight the importance of these aspects, Because corporate governance pertains to the relationship between the three parties, because the three parties being the shareholders, the board of directors, and the executive management, and therefore it's absolutely related to strategic management. Though in practice, corporate governance seems to be more concerned with management of shareholders or board of directors and so on. But I think at a strategic level, we are much concerned about corporate governance and uh, building corporate what we have relating corporate governance to strategic management. So we have written on this in our textbook. It comes in chapter uh, 2. And let me also tell you that along with corporate governance, we have also taken up corporate sustainability as a big issue emerging, and then stakeholders management. And we also brought in this edition, we also brought in risk management, corporate social responsibility and strategic management. This including of risk management uh, turned out to be quite interesting for us, because at the time we planned the framework, this COVID thing was not there. But as we were writing, this COVID thing appeared, and we realized how important the risk management would be for companies. And therefore, and I think as we go to the next editions, we would be emphasizing more on these issues, including corporate governance. The second question is about the case study. Now, let me tell you that COVID-19 has initiated lots of academic work on the impact of COVID-19, and we have had many. In fact, during this season, I must have addressed 10 webinars on the impact of COVID-19 on this and that and this and that, and also attended a few. So there's a lot of academic discourse taking place on the impact of COVID-19. Well, formulating, how the organizational responses have come in, I have not yet come across any case that comprehensively would cover it, But it would be interesting to see how companies, for example, take the case of Serum Institute of India, the largest vaccination producer in the world. How has it managed this spurt of demand, or take the case of the foreign Pfizer company. How has it managed to uh, deal with this huge spurt of demand for vaccines, and how is it managed the back end, and so on and so forth. So procurement of resources, and then um, management of operations, and so on and so forth. So that would be a strategic issue for us. And when these observations they come out, I think there would be many relevant case studies uh, that would come about. Why don't you uh, initiate a case study and write about a company that you know about? How is it managed? Take the case of a like fast moving consumer good company, because fast moving consumer goods companies didn't feel the impact much. So how did they deal with this? Or in the crisis ridden tourism industries, how are the tourism companies trying to face with the uncertainties that have come up because of the COVID-19 impact? So I think all these would be interesting ideas. I can't suggest you a specific case study at this time. Maybe we would write a few soon.
Thank you so much, sir. I think this has been a very useful and insightful session. Thank you, Dr. Adela. Thank you, Professor Azhar. I think people have really been writing a lot of comments like nice, enriching session, and insightful talk, and more on. So I think we would love to host you again sometime for our audience. And thank you all of the audience as well for making this session so interactive, and giving us great questions to interact with both of our speakers. One small announcement towards the end. Sir and Ma'am's book has recently launched in 2020, the fifth edition of the book. And I have given a link and the ISBN of the book on your screens. You can purchase it on Amazon. And for any other issue, please feel free to write back to us at support.india@mheducation.com. We'll soon be circulating a recording of this session and a certificate of participation to all the attendees on your registered email IDs. In case you don't, please feel free to write back to McGraw-Hill. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much, ma'am. It was great to have you with us. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.